So this is the Novation Peak. As you can see, it's a very knobby synth. There are 45 dials and 8 sliders for the 2 envelopes. So let's take a quick overview of the different components of the synth, starting with the oscillator section. I'll hit this initialize button here, which resets the preset to this initialized state. So we have one oscillator set to a sawtooth. Let's switch it to a sine. There's a coarse tuning control, which has a range of plus minus 12 semitones. Other than coarse tuning, you get fine-tune control, so up and down 1 semitone. Now, one thing I like a lot about the synth is that it shows you the current value on this display here, but it also shows you the saved value of the parameter for that preset. So that's very helpful to check where a particular parameter is set at. Now, other than the tuning controls, you have this shape dial here. So this sine wave can be shaped to produce a different waveform, bring in more harmonics. It's a bidirectional dial. And every waveform has this shaping option. So if I switch to the triangle, I can shape that too. This sounds a little bit like Oscillator Hard Sync. Let's check out the sawtooth. So you can hear there are 2 sawtooth waveforms being played there. They're just being played out of phase from each other. For the pulse, you get pulse width modulation. That's the thinnest it gets at the maximum. But if you go to the negative, it goes all the way down to complete silence. You also have this more category. Right now it's another variation to a sine, which can be shaped as well. But if you go into the oscillator tab, scroll to oscillator 1, you'll see under wave more, it's set to be a sine, but you can change that to up to 7 different wavetables. And of course, each of those wavetables has a wavetable position dial with that shape control. In the voicing section, you get a unison option, and the unison value can be set up to a maximum of 8. So when I play one note, all those 8 voices are being played. You can detune them and also spread them. And you can get this very rich super saw tone. But we can also go into the oscillator tab, scroll over here and look for saw density. So right now we're back to that regular sawtooth, but when I crank up this density, you hear that chorusing effect you get when you have multiple voices playing together. And when I crank up density detune, you can hear that richness of a super saw. So this is just one oscillator. You can do it to all 3 oscillators, and you can also have unison on top of that. So you can get an extremely thick sound. Now for modulation, you have 2 dials here. They both affect the pitch of the oscillator. This one is a depth for envelope 2 modulating pitch. We have 2 envelopes here, switch to envelope 2. And now this second envelope shape is modulating pitch. If I set this to a sine on a lower register, we can create a kick drum style sound. The other dial here is for LFO modulation of the pitch. It uses LFO 2. I'll switch back to a sawtooth and let's hear this. Rate control for the LFO, it's set to low mode, high. Let's increase the modulation depth. So it goes into audio rate. And you can also sync it to a tempo. Of course, right now it's synced to an internal clock. There's a fade control, so you can gradually bring in that LFO modulation. You get 4 different shapes here. I couldn't find a dedicated vibrato control on this synth, so you have to use one of the LFOs to create vibrato. Back inside the oscillator settings, you have this V-Sync option, which is basically virtual oscillator hard sync. So if I crank that value up, you get the hard sync tone. So just imagine oscillator 1 is being hard synced to a hidden oscillator. We can also use one of the modulators to modulate that. So next is a mixer section. So you get the level control for the 3 oscillators, but you also get a ring mod option. So it's basically the multiplication output of oscillator 1 and oscillator 2. And lastly, here you also get a noise generator. Next, let's check out the filter section. It's a multi-mode filter, low pass, band pass, and high pass. This is a sawtooth going through the low pass. Very smooth. Let's add some resonance. Now keep in mind this section is purely analog. So if you crank up the resonance, you will hear that self-oscillation on the filter. So if I take away the signal completely, we can just hear the self-oscillation to get that pure sine wave. There's a key tracking option. If I bring that all the way down, no key control, but with it up, we can play that filter. Next is my favorite part on this filter, the overdrive. Sounds a bit like the Bass Station 2 filter. Even though this is a polyphonic synth, we can go into the voices section and switch this to monophonic mode. So the Peak works great as a monophonic synth as well. Let's try the bandpass mode. Resonance and some drive. And switch the slope. The high pass mode. You get a bunch of modulation options on this filter. There's an envelope modulation depth control here. You can use the amp envelope or even the mod envelope. I'll switch back to low pass mode. Let's create a pluck shaped envelope. Let's try it with the square shape. I think the drive really adds to the character of this filter. So that's the envelope modulation of the cutoff. You can also use LFO 1 instead. The two LFOs are identical with all the same controls. Of course, you can choose to have both modulations running at the same time. Last thing here is filter FM. This is the depth control for that. So Oscillator 3 is modulating the filter's frequency. Let's disable the other modulations and just hear this. Nice for some aggressive bass tones. Now, if you're not satisfied with the overdrive on the filter, you also get a filter post drive here. So I'll disable the overdrive, disable filter FM. And now let's hear the filter post drive. You can see the square edges get rounded off a bit there. Combine that with the overdrive. Some pretty heavy distortion there. Now the last thing in the audio chain is the audio effects section. You get a distortion, chorus, delay, and reverb. You also get this very handy effects bypass switch. There's an effects option here to access additional parameters on the effects, and also some global settings, like you have your wet and dry level, as well as a routing control. Right now it's set to parallel, or you can change that to series, and you get a bunch of different options for the order of the effects. I'll leave it in parallel. Let's now check out these effects. Let's hear the distortion on a single sine wave oscillator. So if the filter distortion wasn't enough for you, you have one more stage of distortion with this effect. Let's switch over to a pulse and hear the chorus. You have a level and rate control, and you get 3 different types. But of course you can go into the effects section and adjust additional parameters on the chorus. I like this chorus a lot as it's quite easy to get a decent sound out of it. Alright, next is a delay. The level control here. It's feedback dial. And of course, delay time, which can also be synced to the clock. In the effects menu, we have additional controls for the delay, like this LR ratio, which gives you a stereo delay effect. Lastly, let's check out the reverb. I think this is a really beautiful reverb. Let's hear this on a pure sine wave, like a very plucky sine wave tone. That was reverb type 2. Let's switch to 1. I'll also crank up this reverb feedback parameter. In the effects menu, you have reverb pre-delay control, low pass and high pass damping, reverb size. Let's try increasing that. I'll set it to the maximum. And there's some modulation controls there as well. Let's switch over to reverb 3. Maximum feedback as well. This reverb is a bit more wobbly sounding, which is nice. Nice to have a little bit of character there in your reverb. That effects bypass switch is great. So with just one button, you turn off all the effects simultaneously. Okay, next let's look at the Arpeggiator. Very simple, just turn it on, play a chord, and it gets arpeggiated. You have a gate control. I'll push up the sustain on the amp. So when the gate completely open, it sounds very legato, but you can make it sound more staccato with that. There's a latch option for hands-free control. There's some additional controls for the arpeggiator in this menu here. You have a clock rate here. Of course, this is not just for the arpeggiator, anything that uses tempo. Now the arpeggiator is always using tempo, so you can't have a free-running arpeggiator. More controls for the arpeggiator. Type, which is your arpeggiator direction. There's also a chord mode. That's quite handy. Now you get different rhythm options. Let me just slow this down so you can hear that better. So you can hear how the rhythm changes there for each of those options. And you get 33 of these different options. There's an octave control here for adding additional octaves to your arpeggiation. Swing control. And of course the rate of the arpeggiator. Now, other than the direct modulation controls you get on the device, there's also a mod matrix. You have 16 slots over here. You can choose a destination here. You get everything except controls from the effects section. This here is Oscillator 1 Virtual Sync. So you have direct control over this parameter in the oscillator section, but here you can use one of the modulators to modulate it. Let's increase the depth. Now right now it's a static value that is being set to. But if I move over to the next page, we get two sources here. So let's set source 1 to mod envelope 1. And now you can hear how that sync is being modulated. I'll increase the depth more. Now in this mod matrix, you also get access to the FM controls. So let's change this destination here. If you scroll through this, you'll see all the different parameters that could be modulated, including modulators. And finally, here are the FM destinations. So in this, oscillator 1 is modulating 2, 2 modulating 3, 3 modulating 1, and the noise modulating 1 as well. Let's try oscillator 1 modulating oscillator 2. So I'll bring down the level for 1, and let's listen to oscillator 2. Let's just use sine waves for more traditional style FM. Right now the envelope is still assigned to control that depth. Let's crank it up to the maximum. Now at the maximum, which is 63 here, doesn't sound like it's really strong enough. It's a very subtle FM level. It's definitely working. But that index is just not enough to get those really aggressive FM style tones. Let's try noise modulating oscillator 1. So let's hear oscillator 1 instead of 2. So you can hear it's quite subtle. A bit more intense with the sawtooth, but still it doesn't sound as intense as some dedicated FM synths. Now within the mod matrix, you can also use these two animate buttons to control any parameter. But keep in mind, since these two are switches, you only get two states, a lower and a higher level. Let's try this out. So let's say for this FM tone, instead of using the mod envelope, let's switch that to animate 1. Depth is still set at the maximum. So now you can see the animate button is lit. No FM right now, but when I hit the button, it jumps up to the maximum value. This might sound nice with the effects on. So you get 2 of these animate buttons. So let's say on the second one, we'll assign a different parameter. In the second slot, I'll choose the destination to be filter frequency, increase the depth, set up the filter. So now on the second page, we can set one of these sources to animate too. Once they're lit, you know it's been assigned. So again, we're just jumping between 2 different values on that filter cutoff. Not really groundbreaking as such, but an interesting parameter to have. There's a hold button so you can hold that value. It could have been useful to assign these animate buttons to turn on and off individual effects, but we can't do that here. So that's what the 2 animate buttons are for.